wondering, as youth activists, if anything, what in the Constitution needs to be preserved, and what do you think needs to be changed?
Oh, I'll go first. We just need to burn the whole thing to the ground. Just burn it down. No, I'm actually not joking. I really strongly, I think that there are some really great parts of the Constitution that have been developed. Like I'm, pretty 14th Amendment, just on the list of things that are really important to me. But one of my things about the Constitution is ultimately the way that it was written, it's written in a way that uplifts white supremacy. And if we really want to think about shifting and changing this country, we could adopt a very similar model to what South Africa did after apartheid. We can make human rights an actual right that's included in our Constitution. We can make education a right that is included in our Constitution. We can change the way that folks are able to vote. There are so many things that we can do today that, a bunch of old white men that were all slave owning, that didn't believe that women were people, let alone black people were people or indigenous were people, thought about over 100 years ago.
Yeah, just to add on to that, first off, how come the Equal Rights Amendment, and that some people probably have not heard about in this room, but essentially, whenever I think about the Constitution, right, and the way our country has been evolving, and it's for me, it's really frustrating the fact that this simple amendment that would just say, you would not discriminate based on your sexual orientation and your gender, it hasn't passed, and it's been decades that people have been advocating for this, and it just makes me question, how far have we really come as a country, right? And so that's just one thing for me that's I really wish that would pass soon, and that that would be incorporated in the Constitution. But I will say, outside of Generation Vote, with my job at the Brennan Center, I think about the Constitution all the time, especially when the Constitution is being attacked, all the time. And so the work that I do focuses on redistricting and the census, which is not exactly the sexiest topic for most folks, but don't judge. Thank you. It's coming up in 2020, y'all. But the census is literally the foundation of our democracy, right? There's this thing called the Enumeration Clause in the Constitution that basically says, we should count all people. And this, when it was created at the time, they didn't mean all people, right? American history. But essentially the principle, right, is that all people that are counted, right, deserve to have political representation in this country. And that's why the census is so important. And so for me, in the work that I do, we work on the litigation, the court cases that are right now around, challenging this citizenship question that the administration wants to add to the census, which will scare folks from wanting to participate in this incredibly important milestone in our democracy. And so, it's not really about preserving per se, but for me, thinking constantly about ways that we can communicate to the public about how important it is for us to not be scared, right, by the administration's tactics in trying to promote this narrative that you don't matter, right, that you shouldn't fill out the census because certain communities do not count. And so for me, it's really important thinking about ways that we can educate ourselves, educate our communities, and equip leaders in communities to translate this message to their folks, whether it be their neighbors, right, whether it be the organizations you all go to after school, and just making this part of a conversation, especially in the lead up to 2020.
So when I first looked at this question, my mind went straight to the 13th Amendment and the Second Amendment. And two of these things have one very similar thing in common, is that they both really affect Black and Brown communities. So speaking on the Second Amendment first, I think that's one of the first things that needs to be changed about the Constitution, is that it really upholds this system of violence that is really perpetrated against Black and Brown communities way too often, and it's never talked about. Like when you see mass shootings, just like when you talked about Parkland, it's always focused on white communities, but it's never focused on the violence in Chicago, where they have the worst crime rate in almost the entire world. Like there's the most mass shootings that happen there, and it's never talked about because it's affecting Black and Brown people. So I think that's first where we need to just reevaluate, because when we're talking about the Second Amendment, honestly, like when they wrote it and people say you should really look at the Constitution as like, oh, what did they have in mind when they wrote it? It's like these guys were using bayonets. They weren't using assault rifles. Like it took them 10 minutes to just load their rifle. They weren't. If they were to look forward in history and see what kind of weapons we have today, I highly doubt that would even be in the Constitution. So just from there, point blank, gun control needs to be an issue that's really talked about and really lobbied for in our political system. And I don't think that there's enough support because people feel so attached to their weapons, really. And I don't think that there's really a reason to have a gun if you're living in a city. Like, I get it if you're living on a farm, if you're living somewhere in rural and you feel like you need protection and you have like training and you have like a very very safe way of concealing your weapon. But I don't understand why people should be dying every single day because it's so easy to get a weapon. That's number one. Number two, for the 13th Amendment, I'm sure you guys have all either watched the documentary or heard about this on social media, just about how the 13th Amendment that abolishes slavery doesn't abolish it for people that are in prison or imprisoned for some kind of crime. And they say that they use the terms slavery and indentured servitude as two very different things, but it's been synonymous for so long in our country that it's really been kind of reinventing slavery for Black and brown people, especially in the 90s when we had the prison boom. That was led by the Clinton administration. A lot of people do not know that. And people really did support Clinton without knowing that he signed the Crime Control Act that imprisoned many Black and brown men and basically gave free labor to industries like Victoria's Secret that has their bras made by people in prison. A lot of people don't know that either. So I feel like if we had more conversations and we had more support around these issues that really do affect Black and brown people, that it might be possible one day that people will actually start paying attention. But we're not talking about it because we're talking about it amongst ourselves instead of with other people, like with our politicians and lobbyists and just in the line of work that I do. So at my policy analysis firm, we actually do work for institutional investors, and I've seen firsthand what changes policy, and it's money, and it's always been money. So we think that we're going to go outside of a politician's office and we're going to protest and say we hate guns. Meanwhile, they're having a meeting with a guy saying, I will pay you, or my lobbyist will pay you $5 million to get this bill passed, and nobody's protesting in front of that guy's office. And that's what we need to figure out. We need to figure out where this money's coming from, who's funding these efforts to keep people in prison, to keep making money for them because they're only seeing it as money. And we need to figure out where the origins of this is before attacking like a politician who's really just taking money from anywhere. So like one of the biggest things that I've taken away from my job and my experience has been to really support politicians that are very principled. Like someone like Bernie Sanders, who will not take money from political action campaigns, because these people will literally control every single thing you do. They control whether or not you get reelected. And if we support people like this that are principled and will not take money from anyone, that's really where the change starts. And that's just my opinion on the Constitution.
I love the word just. That's awesome. So,
and also let us just say not everyone has to answer this question, so don't feel that you all need to answer.
Have to,
yes.
Or we do?
You don't.
Okay, I just want to follow what everyone else.
Yeah, no, we have,
Okay.
we have about 20 minutes before we open it up to the audience.
So I'm going to be brief about this question because my answer is very different as sort of the elder statesperson on this, is that I'm very confused about the Constitution, and I've lived through the Vietnam War. I was old enough to sort of be thinking about having to be drafted and what would I do, and here we are years later. And so part of 18 grew out of my own personal story, having really the perspective of what it's like to be youth, and I believe very much in connecting people in ways that transcend age, race, ethnicity, geography, gender, all of that stuff. And so the Constitution, I support everything that everybody before me has said, and I'm quite sure I will support that. I think I'm frightened when certain people in this country trample on the Constitution, parts of it that are really fabulous, and it's horrifying for the parts. As a content person, I'm all about context. And so 1700 was, yes, bayonets and all of that. And so the fluidity of what has to happen for us to be able to mold, we're a young country, You know, you go to places in the world where there are thousands of years of culture and history, and they're challenged too, but we're only 200 something years old, and so we need to adapt. And I just want to say that it really is an honor to be here, and thank you for inviting me here, because you are our future, and at 18 we want to support your voice. And so that's really, I can't think of anything better than to really have an imprint and an impact on youth. And there's not someone on this panel, everybody here is somebody that I want to connect with, because this is it. Like, pay attention to history. You know, things that are happening, people never thought would happening. I'm a Jewish man growing up here. You know, I'm a native New Yorker. It frightens me when I go out in the world, and I travel the country a lot, okay? So I can relate to so much about a lot of it, and it's that bridge that we want. But young people need to pay attention and think about what you can really do, because when I went to the climate march, I was also, everybody was so motivated, and it was like, what's your outcome, you know? So the Constitution is a gift, and it's a little bit of our curse as well, and we need to balance both of those out, so thank you.
It covered a lot of what I.
So I want to move on to our second question. Can I just add on?